Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a writer and cartoonist. He's been a journalist. He's written such programs as the G.I. Joe animated series and the Vampire Diaries spin-off, Legacies. He's had pieces published in Mad Magazine, and he's the author of such works as the graphic novels The Very Final Last Girls, Charm City, and his current work, Pale of Settlement, which has been described as a cross between Stranger Things and Fiddler on the Roof, minus the songs. Please help me welcome Josh Eiserike. Josh, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
You froze up for a second. Let's see.
I froze up for a second.
Yes.
Thank you. I said thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Do you want me to try on a different device? Is this?
No, I think we got it. Let's see what happens here. I think.
Okay, great.
So, well, we have a lot to cover, but I always like to start by going back. I want to go back with you. So you grew up in Maryland.
Yes.
And so I wonder, what was your family life like, in particular with Judaism? Were you observant at all? What was your family?
I grew up, pretty much. If Steven Spielberg had made a movie in Maryland, that was my family in the 1980s. Like, it was, two-car garage, three kids. It was, we would go off and explore construction sites in the neighborhood. It was the 80s. But as far as Judaism goes, I grew up pretty mainline conservative, maybe like more toward the right conservative, egalitarian, but we would go to synagogue every Shabbat.
Oh, you did go every week? Oh.
Or most weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very contentious relationship with it because, as you mentioned, I'm a cartoonist and I love cartoons. And Saturday morning when I was a kid was when all my favorite cartoons were on.
So you were to the point that you wouldn't watch in the house. I mean, you observed to that point?
No, we weren't that observant. Like, it was sort of, we would cherry pick like less than what my mother would do when she was a kid. Like, they wouldn't tear toilet paper, but like we wouldn't go out to restaurants, or I wasn't allowed to go out and see friends on Friday nights. But going to Blockbuster and renting Indiana Jones for the 20th time was totally fine.
That was okay. We had to be in for Shabbat meal, and then afterwards we could go out. Friday night, as long as we were there for the meal first. No plans before that meal.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Yeah, but Saturdays was good to go though.
Yeah.
So what were some of your favorite books growing up?
Comics or novels?
Either one. I was into both. I was a big comic collector growing up.
Yeah. I'll put it to you like this. I was 11 years old when the X-Men animated series came out, and of course that will date me if I haven't done so already. And that was it. Like, that was my gateway drug to the X-Men, to the Avengers, to Spider-Man, to Batman, to Superman, all the superheroes, and then very quickly thereafter to Vertigo titles. Like, I don't know if I'm still allowed to talk about Sandman, but it was a big part of my youth. I should not have been reading Sandman when I was 12 years old, but and a lot of it went over my head. But man, did I love it.
I always try to separate as much as I can the artist from the work.
For sure.
If I always look at it like this, if I enjoy something before I knew, I'll keep doing it. I don't have to support new works from them once I find out.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That is totally fair. But yeah, no, I mean, Sandman was a big one. I got really into this cartoonist Alex Robinson, who had a graphic novel, Box Office Poison. And then on the book side, I didn't read real books from like middle school to the end of high school, because I was like, why would I read anything that's not a comic? I certainly before that had a John Grisham phase. To the point where I wanted to be a lawyer, but then I quickly realized that, oh wait, I don't get to be in the mafia. Like, I don't want this. Like, that just doesn't sound fun. And then I loved adventure stories. When I was a kid, I loved Peter Pan. I loved Huck Finn. I mean, this is to the point of Pale Settlement. I love Treasure Island. Like anything where a kid would go off, have an adventure with skeezy adults who didn't have the best intentions in in mind, I would read it. And then late high school, early college, I got back into books without pictures.
Well, so okay, so when did you first start realizing? Well, I guess first showing an interest in writing, and
Mhm.
even more, when did you start realizing that you had a talent for it?
I still have it. I'm just kidding. No, when I was in high school, I always knew I wanted to make comics, and the writing was an excuse to draw. I always thought, oh, I'm going to be an illustrator.
Mhm.
That's what I want to do. And
So
my
you did that as a kid?
illustrations,
Did you? I mean, you drew a lot as a kid, and you
I
just
did. I drew all the time. Like I was the kid sitting in the back of the class making pictures that would get me in trouble.
oh,
When I was in fifth grade, we started an underground newspaper. And let me be clear, I was like a nerdy kid.
I was going to ask
But
you about this one, but go ahead. Yes.
yeah, I was a nerdy kid, but like I was smart enough to know, oh, if I'm going to make a class newspaper, I should get the mean girl who's popular to write a gossip column. So I did, and that got us all sent to the principal's office. So at the age of 10, I was learning about First Amendment free speech laws, and what you can and can't do in a school. And I always knew that I wanted to draw. Sorry, go ahead.
Before we go into the drawing thing, I have to ask about this because I saw that about you, that you started the underground paper and got the mean girls to do a gossip column. So
Yeah.
first of all, like, what was the payment first of all in fifth grade? I mean, what could it possibly be like? It's like I'll give you an extra cookie or whatever it is.
No, it was just, hey, Melissa, do you? I probably shouldn't use your name. It's been 40 years.
And also, what could possibly be in a fifth grade gossip column? Like, Sally picks her nose at recess, and if there was a Sally, I profusely apologize to her if that's what she did. But go ahead.
I honestly do not remember, other than we got in a lot of trouble. And then when I was in high school and I knew I wanted to draw and I wanted to make comics, I had this really wonderful teacher, and I will use his name,
Okay.
Mr. Deichman, who I'm still sometimes in touch with, who was encouraging. He's like, oh yeah, if you want to make comics, like I'll sponsor you. Like, you can have a faculty sponsor and we can sell them at the school store. And again, my art wasn't great, but it was the creative outlet I needed at that point in my life, just to tell stories, mostly about me and my friends and the dumb stuff we were getting up to. And as an aside, there was no better way as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old boy to get girls to like you in the 90s, to have them go on the morning announcement, buy Josh's new comic book at the school store. It was like, what? Who is this nerd? But it was great. It was great. And then when I was in college, I went to the University of Maryland, and that was simply because I wanted to follow in the shoes of cartoonists like Frank Cho, who did a comic strip called Liberty Meadows and a bunch of stuff from Marvel, and Aaron McGruder, who created the Boondocks, which was a big comic at the time that was highly influential. And I wanted to go to Maryland because I wanted to work at the paper where those guys had gone. And also, he wasn't a household name then, but Jeff Kinney, who does the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, was also a Maryland cartoonist. And that's what I did. I had a cartoon in the school paper for 2 years, and it really taught me, again, that I'm not a great illustrator, but also just being accountable to readers. And just because I think something is good or funny doesn't mean it's going to get the reaction that I want, or vice versa. And it taught me how to tell jokes, how to write. And from there, in grad school, I did an internship at Mad Magazine, and then Marvel Comics.
About that too.
Yes, please.
You say about the humor aspect. Humor is so subjective. I always like try to put funny things as well. And to me, it's always like, if I find it funny, that's all that I care about. If it makes me laugh when I'm putting it in, I don't care if anyone else does or not. That's it. And amazing with a teacher. It was also a teacher who got me. It's amazing what teachers can do. A teacher says to me in high school too, you have a talent for this, and that sticks with you so much more than like other people, because I guess parents are supposed to say it, but a teacher doesn't have to. Well, first of all, with the gossip column, was there anything ever about teachers?
Probably. Again, I don't remember. I just remember getting in trouble, and the principal was like, Tinker versus Des Moines. Let's talk about that. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, I guess just talking about Tinker versus Des Moines, right?
Yeah, I'm 10 years old. What is that?
So let's talk about Marvel. So you had interned at Marvel for a while. So
Yes.
first, how awesome was that? That was like my dream coming true. During what period were you there?
I was there fall 2005. So this is like, and I was interning in the Ultimates office, which was Ralph Macchio, not the Karate Kid, the Marvel editor Ralph Macchio, who was amazing. John Barber and Nicole Booz Wiley were I know Nicole changed her name when she got married. So forgive me, Nicole, if you're listening to this. But it was awesome. Like, it was kind of just like shut up and learn. Mm-hmm. I would read scripts. I would do balloon placements, which is, I would get the scripts and then I would be like, oh, well, where should the balloons go on the arc? I became friends with the other interns, some of the editors. And the real benefit was just seeing how the comics got made, but also having the opportunity to have the editor's ear and be like, this is what I want to do. And I've said this to him a couple of years ago when my graphic novel, The Very Final Last Girls, came out. Like, John Barber, we haven't talked in years. This comic wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you just giving me some good advice, a million years ago back at Marvel. And just being able to pitch and seeing what scripts look like.
And what story ideas of your own as well?
Yes, but not for real. Like, it was just like a practice pitch. Uh-huh. Maybe if my pitch had been incredible, they would have bought it, but it wasn't. I was learning, and the stakes were low. And the big lesson and the big takeaway was, don't come to us, have us come to you. So, if anybody's listening who's like, I want to write for Marvel, and again, I was an intern there and I'm still in touch with a few people, a million years ago, go out and make your own thing. And that's what I took from John. So I finished my internship and then I went out and I made my first comic. Not the stuff that I stole in the school store, sold in the school store. There might've been some stealing going on. But just like, all right, what does it mean to actually put out a book? What does it mean to go to one of these conventions and sit behind a table? And much like when I was a cartoonist in college, like, you get instant feedback from readers. Hey, do you want to buy? No, I don't want to buy that. That's not interesting to me. And it's great. I still table at shows. Not as much as I'd like, because I think my wife would kill me if I did more than like 3 shows a year. But I love it.
Let me ask you that before we go on with you. I'm just curious. Let's jump to Mad Magazine a little bit.
Sure.
When you worked there, because I loved Mad. I, grew up in Mad like many kids. I do another podcast where I interview celebrity type things, and so I've been fortunate enough to interview Sergio Aragones and
oh my goodness,
Olo. So tell me about your experiences at Mad and everything. And who'd you get to meet and work with at all?
So it was an internship that led to some freelance writing. And sadly, Matt is no longer with us. I mean, it is, but it's just reprints, right. Which makes me sad because, it's the thing I'm most proud of in my life, that I was, just a small part of me was involved, or a small part of that amazing legacy I was a part of. And like I grew up reading Mad and I loved it, and Mad completely shaped my worldview. And so when I was in graduate school, I went to a lot of grad school, but I was at the University of Missouri studying journalism, and everybody had to get an internship that summer. So, my friends are applying to like the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Time Magazine, the Washington Post, like real, great papers and publications. And journalism school was great for me for many reasons, but I was never meant to be a journalist, I think. And I applied to Mad Magazine, and if you're familiar with it, Wizard Magazine.
Of course, yes.
And I had to decide. I got both internship offers. Do I want to go to Mad or do I want to go to Wizard? And it was ultimately, I was like, well, Wizard is not in New York City. Mad is in New York City. I think I'm going to go to Mad. And I'm so glad I did. And Wizard, which is a comic book magazine, would have been Also a ton of fun and really great. But at Mad, it was just more advanced education, what I had been learning as a college cartoonist about writing jokes, pitching jokes, seeing that, something that, to your point, something that I thought was really funny, nobody thought was funny, or something that I was like, well, this is kind of stupid. It's like, great, we're going to buy that. It's like, okay, cool. Great.
Who were some of the people that you dealt with? Anyone that?
John Ficarra was the editor-in-chief. Dave Corrado was my direct editor, who I really liked. Joe Raiola, everybody there was great. Joe Raiola, Amy Faziolas, I think pronounced her last name. Charlie Kundu. It's been a long time.
You remember what stories you had that you did that got printed?
I sold some jokes about video games. I sold a joke about NASCAR, that if they wanted to be better for the environment, they would change to like NASCAR pool. And they would all write. It was very silly. I sold a 9/11 joke. And then I sold a couple. They used to do this thing called the Mad 20, where every year they would run down like the 20 dumbest things of the year. And I sold a couple of those. I sold one about Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. And I sold another one about the Creation Museum I think it's in Kentucky.
Very, very cool. Very impressed with this. So
thank you.
Okay, so you started out journal. You started talking about journalism, and I saw that you did that. You were a reporter for a while. So where and how did you get involved with that if you weren't so into it, I guess, at first?
Sure. So I went to journalism school. When I was, as an undergrad, I had an advisor who was great. And I was like, I want to do comics. And she's like, well, yeah, that's probably not a career. Have you thought about journalism? I was like, no. She's like, do you like working at the school paper? I was like, yes. And I'm also a huge music nerd. So while I was making comics, I was just doing reviews of some of my, favorite bands were putting out new albums. And I liked writing. I enjoyed it. I had fun. I got to nerd out about my favorite records in a very public place. People still yell at me to this day for like, that third Garbage album is not good. And I'm like, yes, it is. You gave it a 9 out of 10. I'm like, I stand by it. Anyway, so I went to the University of Missouri. I studied journalism on the advice of my advisor to specifically go there. And then from there, I did my master's project at the Washington Examiner, which I don't even know if it's still around. It was DC's like tabloid newspaper. Yeah. The editorial page was conservative. The paper itself was just... I
believe they are still around, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, to back up, at the end of that experience, they had a job offer for me. And I was like, I don't really know if I want to work at this paper and move back to DC. So that's when I was like, all right, well, I'm going to apply to Marvel. They've rejected me twice already. Last time's a charm. And then instead of taking that job, I moved to New York and went to Marvel for 6 months. And then ultimately came back to the DC area. I got a job at a paper called the Potomac News and its sister publication, the Manassas Journal-Messenger, writing features and entertainment stuff. And it was great. I spent, 3 years just writing whatever came in the door, but also doing, writing about music and movies and plays.
Liberties to go out to do what you wanted as well.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the pay was peanuts, but every week I'd come in, and this will date me as well, there'd be a stack of free CDs on my desk, and I'm like, this is the greatest. Oh, I can go to any show. I was in my early 20s. Absolutely. Like it was amazing. It was amazing.
So you moved out to LA eventually?
Yes.
What point did you just say, I'm going to go cross country for this?
I got to a point, and I was making comics, but I got to a point living in the DC area where I was like, I feel like I'm going to the same bars and I'm going out with the same girls and I'm just doing the same thing, and I just need a change. So I want to move to a new city and go to different bars and go out with the same different girls, and just do the same things, but and I also, like newspapers I enjoyed, but it was never the right fit. I didn't necessarily want to be the guy writing about the person doing something. I wanted to be the person who was doing the thing.
Sure.
And again, like sometimes I still miss it. Like I love newsrooms. I loved a lot of my colleagues. I had a ton of fun. I wrote some really cool stories. They pretty much let me do whatever I want, which was great. So on a very calculated whim, because I love job security so much, I decided to quit my job in community newspaper and move out to LA to become a screenwriter.
Right.
So that's what I did. I somehow tricked USC to letting me in to the film production program.
So you went to school first. You went to
That was kind of the excuse to go out to school.
Okay.
Or to go out west. Was like, well, I don't know anything about this industry. If I go to school, I can learn about it and hopefully get a job. And I was very, very lucky when I went to Mizzou that I was on a full ride. Not so much USC. So I had to figure out how I was going to pay for it. Ultimately, I did. It was fine. Everything, worked out in the end. But it was scary, taking out a lot of loans for something really crazy like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. Yeah, sure. That sounds like a great idea.
How'd you get your first gig, I guess, once going out there? I mean, yeah, it's absolutely scary, terrifying. But how'd you get your first gig afterwards?
So it actually had nothing to do with USC and everything to do with the comics I was making. My best friend and I, while I was at this newspaper, he was working as a lawyer in Baltimore. And around the time that I quit and moved out to LA, he quit and moved up to New York. But while I ostensibly was writing stories and while he was ostensibly doing law, we were really just on GChat making these ridiculously inappropriate and offensive comics that we would sell. Yes, that we would sell at shows. He would write it, I would draw it. He was also very much involved in like the improv scene in Baltimore, and I still think they're really funny. My biggest ambition for this comic was I'll get better as an artist. I'll get to do a project with my best friend, and maybe I can find a small publisher to pick it up. Mm-hmm. Well, the third one never happened, but we did a show in New York shortly after he had moved out to New York and I moved out to LA. And unbeknownst to us, a producer picked up the book. So, 2 days later, we get an email. Hey, this book's hysterical. Have you boys ever thought about turning it into a TV show? And we were like, no, but that's a fun idea.
That happens all the time. If I had a nickel for every story I've heard like that. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, for sure. And we had no idea. So 2 months later, we're in LA being chauffeured around to pitching this comic based on essentially an exaggerated version of us in our 20s. I don't know if I should say this, but I will. A lot of these stories is based on another. He was a friend in college who was very close with my best friend in law school, who is now a sitting United States congressman. His name is not in the comic, but many of these debaucherous stories are about him.
Okay, no names, but rhymes with. No.
Rhymes with Congressman. I don't know.
Oh, I think. Yes. Okay.
But so anyway, so we pitch it as the show. The producer feels bad he doesn't sell it, so he's like, "Listen, I'm doing this new G.I. Joe animated series.
Amazing.
How would you boys like to write an episode?" And we're like, "Well, we grew up in the Jewish suburbs of Maryland. We weren't allowed to watch G.I. Joe because it had guns. We don't know anything about G.I. Joe." He's like, "That's fine. That's fine. I'll send you the story Bible." And we're like, "What is that?" So then we got to write an episode of G.I. Joe, and where USC was very helpful is I go to one of my professors who I knew was a lawyer, and I'm like, I have a contract. I don't know if this is okay, but can you look over it? She's like, ethically, I can't, but let me put you in touch with a manager friend of mine. And I've been working with him ever since, and he's been absolutely wonderful. And from there, just other things as they come up. I've written, I've sold television. God willing, will one day get made. I've sold features. God willing, one day will not get made. These are movies that you take because you just need a paycheck. I've written on other shows, and I've continue to, write film and television. Sometimes something happens, sometimes it doesn't. But what I love about comics is if I have a crazy idea like Pale of Settlement, which nobody in a million years is going to be like, yes, I want to spend $100 million, and I guess unless it's animated, to make a TV show or a movie that takes place in the world of Fiddler on the Roof, and has kids going on adventures. But in comics, I can do it. So it's been kind of like, especially since COVID, and since the strike and now the fires, comics has been just like an amazing creative outlet.
Well, going back to the TV things a second. So what's that feeling like for you that, first of all, did you get to sit in on the recording sessions at all for the G.I. Joe, or no?
For G.I. Joe, I did. And I found out after the fact that some of the actors that I was in the room with, the voice actors, are like legends in their field. And I was like, oh, that's cool. If I had known that going in, I probably would have been.
So what's that feeling like when you get, I mean, it's amazing to hear your words being performed by what was that feeling like for you the first time?
It was just the coolest thing ever. We were still hurting in that, we didn't know anything about animation or working in animation. And we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we created something and they made a toy out of this? So we're like, what about like a robot horse that breathes fire? That's cool. It got cut from the script. It's not in the episode, but I was like, man, it would have been cool to have a toy.
And what was your experience like on the Vampire Diaries spinoff, Legacies?
It was awesome. I mean, that was like kind of grad school part two. I mean, yes, it's a show about, teenage vampires, werewolves, and witches. And yet, we took it very seriously. And it was challenging in a good way. I learned a ton. My writing got better. And it was, just a further lesson in collaboration and working with a team of writers. It was awesome. And, I'm still in touch with a few of those writers, and it was a great, and some of them have now gone on to create their own shows, which is incredible.
So all right, before we go into the graphic novels, do you have any advice for people looking to get into screenwriting?
Make comics.
Make comics first.
Make comics. Well, I mean, learn the craft, learn how to write a screenplay, but I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't been like, oh, I want to make this really dumb thing with my friend. Like my boss, I teach comic book writing here in LA. My boss is a comic book writer of some of some, I don't want to say notoriety, but whatever the more positive version of that is. And I've heard him say, and I agree with it. It's like, you want to be a screenwriter, make a comic. The bar to entry, it's not easy, but the bar to entry is so much lower. Like, you can go out and do this today. There's nothing stopping anybody from just making a comic. Now, making a good comic, that's different. But you learn, you just keep making more and you make more. And I said to my wife, I'm like, all right, I got to figure out what my next comic's going to be. Because it's like, I can go out and make this thing. Whereas, I write a screenplay and I'm very proud of some of the stuff I've written that's never been made, that likely will never get made. And through no fault of quality, just, one of the first screenplays I wrote was a teen comedy in the vein of like American Pie or Superbad, but set in pirate times. It's called Booty Seekers. And I got a lot, I wrote for Mad Max. And I got a lot of meetings off of it, and it was great. But the lesson was nobody wants to make a movie. It's like, here's a genre you usually make for $10 million. Let's do it for $100 million. Like, the movie's never going to get made. But if I wanted to, I could turn it into a comic, which is awesome.
So, okay, so you were doing screenwriting for a while. I'm going to get to the graphic novels now. So, we'll tackle each one individually. But what made you decide to go to this type of genre in the first place? Like, you were doing comics, you were doing screenwriting. So what made you decide to say, hey, I want to start tackling graphic novels?
I mean, it's just, to me, graphic novels and comics are the same. I like serialized storytelling. All of my graphic novels were written as miniseries, to get very specific. So like Very Final Last Girls was written as a 6-issue miniseries. And I remember when I signed with Darby, on sale now from Darby Pop Publishing. This is a comic about the mostly girls who survive horror films. And I said to the publisher, who, to bring it full circle, was also the producer of G.I. Joe many, many years later, who has his own comic book company. I said, listen, Jeff, I think my cliffhanger at the end of the first issue was kind of soft. Can we combine issues 1 and 2 and put it out as a double-sized first issue? And he's like, no, I don't do single issues. We're just going to release it as a graphic novel. And I was like, great. That sounds great. And by the way, that's where the readers are. Like, some people like me, I still buy serialized monthly comics, but most people and my friends are just like, well, tell me when the trade is out or the graphic novels out. I just want to read it all at once. And that's great. So like with Pale of Settlement, the current comic, like, it's meant to be a graphic novel, but there's 5 chapters and each chapter has a cliffhanger because I like cliffhangers.
Well, before we get to that one, can we just tell me a little bit about, expand upon what The Very Final Last Girls is, the storyline?
Sure. So it's picks up where just about every horror film ends, where there's one usually girl, she survives, everybody's dead, and then starts in a zombie movie. Then the government swoops in, and rather than roll the credits, it's, oh, by the way, this stuff happens all the time. I run a facility. It's like rehab, witness protection for mostly girls like you who have survived what do we call them? Metaphysical phenomena. So then this lead character who survived essentially Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, take your pick of Walking Dead, zombie films, meets the survivors of stories like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Saw, and then they start getting picked off one by one. So these girls who have nothing in common have to put aside mostly girls. There's one guy inspired by Elijah Wood's character from The Faculty. They have to put aside their differences and figure out who's killing them. It's the dumb initial pitch was it's X-Men meets Cabin in the Woods.
Fun concept, really fun concept.
Thank you.
Charm City.
Sure. Charm City is on sale now from Scout Comics. This was my follow-up comic. It's a serial killer murder mystery set in Baltimore, but with magic. And very much influenced by my time. It's the most personal thing I've ever written. It's very much influenced by my time as a music journalist working in and around, DC and Baltimore, although this is Baltimore, because the official nickname of Baltimore is Charm City. The dumb pitch there is it's Jessica Jones meets Harry Potter.
Okay, so let's talk about Pale of Settlement. I love the blurb that we discussed at the beginning, the Stranger Things meets Fiddler on the Roof without music. Coincidentally, I just watched Fiddler with my son this past weekend. So,
nice.
Yeah, so I these are the things I love. I read historical fiction. I write historical fiction. So tell me about the story, how it started, what was the impetus behind it?
Sure. So I was trying to figure out what my new comic would be. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you haven't read Pale Settlement, the first chapter is free right now on Webtoon. Go read it now. It'll take you a few minutes because I'm likely going to get into some spoiler territory.
Pause this and come back. Right.
Yeah, come back because there are 2 pretty big twists at the end of the first chapter. And if you don't want that spoiled, I'm about to spoil. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Thank you for reading. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, so I was like, I want to do a story in a world, like I want to do like an adventure story in a world that I don't typically see adventure stories. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like, I was brainstorming, and I used to play this computer game when I was a kid called Quest for Glory 4, Shadows of Darkness, part of the Sierra, I don't know if you're familiar, the Sierra Online Quest for Glory series. And it was a point and click adventure game that took place in Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, that's a cool setting. And then I was like, well, that setting's also like, at least from my childhood and learning about it, like it's inherently Jewish. And then I realized, wait a second, like I never liked those stories as a kid because it was always like these people who like living in the shtetl who were just kind of resigned to their fate. Bad stuff would happen, and life was life, and there was nothing they could do. Whereas I grew up on Spider-Man, and X-Men, where if there's a bad guy, you punch the bad guy. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, how can I combine that? And I didn't realize that it was very specifically Jewish for a long time, because as I was trying to, and I went through so many drafts of trying to figure out what this was. I knew the world. I knew the world I wanted to explore. And I also knew what I wanted the twist at the end of the first issue to be. That this kid who you're following, this 12-year-old boy, and by the way, if you read the comic, you'll know who I'm talking about, but he's not the lead character. But for a long time, he was that at the end of the first issue, you find out, oh, this is 12-year-old Gregory Rasputin before he becomes crazy evil wizard. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out this story. Like, how do I do the Godfather with a 12-year-old kid? And specifically, it takes place after the assassination of the Tsar in 1881 when Rasputin was 12. And that's when, at some points in Russian history, and I'm fudging the history, I did a ton of research. At some points, that's when boys would go serve in the military. Mm-hmm. And what do we know about young Rasputin? Well, very little. He grew up on a farm in Siberia, and he served in the military. That's pretty much it. We don't know much more about him until he's like, oh, crazy wizard who may or may not have had the best interests of the dynasty at heart, and was probably just in it for himself. And to me, that's a really interesting story. But at some point, after going through many, many revisions, I realized I was writing The Phantom Menace. And by that, it's like, oh, do we really need to see the origin of Darth Vader? Like, yes, but is this the best way to tell the story? And there was this other character who I knew I wanted a girl. And in some versions, she had magical powers to see the future. And to borrow the phrase from Cabin in the Woods, in the earliest version, she was like the Harbinger, who, like, when they show up to the Pale of Settlement, she's like, if you go in there, you're going to die. Like, because and like the golem was, going around the countryside killing people. And that was the original version. And I was in a master class that I took with one of my favorite writers, Brian Michael Bendis. And he had David Walker in as a guest, and they co-created this comic, Naomi, which is a wonderful comic from DC. And it ran I think it ran for 1 or 2 seasons. I don't remember, on the CW. And they were talking about the creation of that comic. And it was, we're going to do the hero's journey, but from a female perspective. And at that moment, it clicked. I was like, I have the wrong lead character. It's not about this boy who grows up to be an evil wizard, although that's still part of the story. It's about this girl. And any version I had before is wrong. She's not a revolutionary trying to overthrow the Tsar. She's not this oracle who has magical abilities. Forgive me for saying, she's a Disney princess. She's the rabbi's daughter in a shtetl. Like, the story I didn't want to write, I realized is the story I needed to write. Who, to quote Belle from Beauty and the Beast, she wants much more than this provincial life. Like, she's chafing against the strict confines of her community. She has a very contentious relationship with her father, the rabbi of their village. And she's young, but it's like, hey, it's time to start thinking about your arranged marriage. And she's like, I don't want any of this. I want to read secular books. I want to see the empire. And you find out, it's hinted at in the first chapter, you find out that her father is not what he seems. Mm-hmm. And also, once I realized that, it opened up the story that, I'm not writing The Phantom Menace. Now I'm writing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, in that I take this character, she goes off on a quest, but it's really about her relationship with her father.
Yeah. Very, very, very cool. I myself look forward to reading this. I love this stuff. Just curious, do you have a favorite historical era?
Historical what?
Era.
Pirates.
Pirates. Okay.
Pirates. I love pirates.
There. Okay, so you also teach writing now?
Yes, I teach screenwriting and comic book writing at the New York. This is confusing. At the New York Film Academy in Los Angeles.
Is this, you have to go there, or is this online as well?
We do offer online classes, but the degree program, I sound like a commercial. I love working there. The degree programs are all in LA, but they have a New York location, I think Miami, all over the world. Fantastic.
Okay. So if people want, first of all, what are you working on next? What do we you?
I am working, continuing to work on Pale of Settlement. So this was selected for the Jewish Writers Initiative Digital Storytelling Lab.
That's fantastic.
Which fully funded production of the comic. I spent the last year with this fellowship. We had meetings in New York and LA. I met all these amazing other fellows doing Jewish projects as diverse as, web series on Persian American Judaism, to a video series about Jewish summer camp, to a cartoon series, and I think you had Sherry Pear on,
Yeah.
to about issues surrounding female pregnancy. And I feel bad that I'm not going through and listing all the other fellows, but just these amazing projects.
How can people
Sorry,
get
go ahead.
involved how can people get involved with the program itself?
Sure. I got a targeted ad on Facebook and I applied, and there was an application and an interview process. But because I had already been thinking about this comic, because I'd already been working on it, because I'd already been writing it, like it was just a matter of copy paste my pitch materials, and then an interview process, and then I was very fortunate to be selected. I think they're about to open it up to a third round. So if people are listening, I would highly encourage it. It's an amazing opportunity, with a very, very generous grant to produce your project. So I released the first chapter kind of in real time. I partnered with an amazing artist, Tina Ritchie. I definitely want to give her as much credit as I can, because this comic is truly a collaboration. And Tina is Jewish, and I didn't set about to find a Jewish artist. She had done a variant cover of Charm City that I really, really loved. And, we struck up like a friendship online.
Okay.
And when I announced that I had received this grant, she was like, "Oh, I didn't know you were Jewish." She was putting together a graphic novel anthology, about cartoonist reactions to October 7th. It's not my project, it's Tina's project, so I don't really want to speak too much about that. She asked me if I wanted to be involved. Of course I wanted to be involved. And then when it came time to do this project, like I looked at a ton of artists, but I was in the back of my mind, I was like, and my wife was like, just hire Tina. She's perfect. She's perfect for this. So thankfully she was amenable. She's working on chapter 2 right now. When all is said and done, it'll be 5 chapters. So there's a little break right now going on. The first chapter's up, and once Tina's ready, we're gonna kick it right off with chapter 2, and the adventure continues.
Fantastic. And how can people follow you on social media?
Sure, I'm fit. So my website is just josheiserike.com. My name. You can sign up for my mailing list there. You can see links to all my comics. The Pale Settlement is on Webtoons, Tapas, Global Comics, all for free again. On social media, I'm at @Eiserike at Instagram. I believe I'm there on Twitter as well. I don't ever really go on Twitter, so I don't know. Maybe I'm still there if they haven't kicked me off yet. But yeah, at Eiserike at Instagram is the best place. And then my personal Facebook page, just Josh Eiserike.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you. Thank you again for coming on. It's been so much fun getting to talk to you and all about your work. And I urge everyone to go check out Pale of Settlement. It's a lot of fun. And as well, I got to check out the other ones as well. So a lot of fun. And again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. This was a ton of fun. And, if you do go check out the comic, it is, as I mentioned, like I didn't set out to make a very, very Jewish comic, but it kind of needed to be. It deals with a lot of thematic issues. I would also say that it's recommended, maybe early middle school and up. There is some violence. Like my mom was like, when she read it, she's like, they should teach this in Hebrew school. I'm like, you don't know where the story's going, Mom. Like, I don't know if they should. But yeah, I invite you to check it out. Drop me a line. I'm very easy to find. You can do it through my website, through Instagram, through one of these webcomic platforms, and just, let me know what you think. And we're also working on a print edition of Pale Settlement. So that will, and look, I mean, we're going to do it as a graphic novel. Like I said, just even though it's 5 chapters, that's going to be a while. Tina still, she's working hard. And also, I don't think that can actually come out until 2027. simply because there's some art in the comic that I thought was public domain, but it is not public domain until 2027. So don't sue me, Mr. Salvador Dali's estate. Anyway.
That's okay. Well, thank you again, and look forward
Thank you.
to these things. Again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Josh Eiserike. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.